This is Marilyn Shannon and the Breaking Free Show, and I am so happy to be here with you today. Thank you for being here with me. And we're looking forward to a really interesting show, so hold on to your seats. Before we get started, I want to say hi to Amnon, who's busy pushing all the buttons and keeping everything moving. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, and you? I missed you. I wasn't
I'm
here last week.
well. That's all right. I missed you.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you. Well, sometimes, you know what, everyone out there, sometimes you got to, the girls got to do what a girl's got to do. And
yep.
sometimes we all have to say, "Phew," things happen in our lives, and you have to say, "Whew, hold on, let me attend to my life and take care of personal things so that I can be at my best and do the things that I need to do." And we all have to sometimes just check out. And I had to do that last week. But I'm back now and raring to go. And I'm excited about today's show because I think we're going to learn a whole lot. Not think. We're going to learn a whole lot about things that we thought we knew. Maybe we did. Maybe we're going to hear a whole new slant, but it's going to be very interesting. So we're going to take our food apart. We're going to take our lifestyle apart, and we're going to find out some interesting things. And I have a guest in the studio today that I'm really excited to introduce to you, Howard Jacobson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Unbeknownst to me, Howard's a neighbor, so it's amazing who you find living not so far away from you. So Howard is a marketer. He's done incredible things in his life, and now is a new phase of what he's doing. So I'm going to just turn it over, and he's going to tell you more about him than I can. So tell everybody who you are.
Okay, so I've been a marketer for 15 years. Before that, I was a health educator, and I left school with a PhD in health studies and a master's in public health, and tried to figure out how to make a living, and found my way into the corporate world, where I learned a really valuable skill around change management, coaching, and organization development, which were all things that I really hadn't learned in graduate school. So I could kind of help people one at a time, but the work experience really gave me a sense of how to do things institutionally and how to do things that stick. And from there, I went on to start my own business, and again, hit upon a giant obstacle, which was I didn't know how to get clients. I didn't know how to market myself. So I went back and started studying marketing and fell in love with that. In terms of helping clients with their marketing, because first of all, when you're helping someone with marketing, you're helping them make money, and it's really easy to sell that. It's much easier to sell that than it is to sell a lot of the softer skills. I also loved it because it gave me a huge insight into the way marketing works. And there's good marketing, and there's bad marketing, there's ethical marketing, there's unethical marketing, and I feel like, you know, in 15 years of doing that, I really got to rip the cover off and see what goes on and see how companies use ethical marketing to help us realize our goals and our dreams, and how they use very sleazy or manipulative marketing to get us to do things that are really not in our long-term best interests. And over the past several years, I've gotten back into the health and wellness field, and at first I felt like, you know, that marketing stuff was something I just wanted to forget about, put it in a shelf on the back, the back wall of the closet, and not think about it. And then I realized that it really is one of my strengths in helping people navigate health, is to realize how many trillions of dollars are being spent to get them to do things that are not in their best interest, to get them to do things that are actually unhealthy, and to kind of, let's forgive ourselves a little bit for the choices we've made, and to empower us to move forward, to really become our own marketing agencies, to do some one-on-one marketing with ourselves, to ourselves, for ourselves, so that we can do the things that are good for us. And so that, how do we help our kids choose healthy lifestyles, healthy behaviors? How do we help our significant others, our extended family members, our neighbors? Ultimately, that's all marketing. So
years ago I worked in TV and print. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that to you. And I also, when I left the industry, it was because I woke up one day consciously and said, they're stretching the truth here. I don't like this very much. But the education of how to work with people and how to get an idea across is instrumental. So you see, and I think that there is some shifts now because of technology and things that are available to more and more people. We can get more and more of the truth out. That's why I'm so delighted to have Howard here, and have our platform to be able to do that, because we're not controlled by anybody. You know, we don't have a big boy on top of us saying you can't say this, you can't do that, you can't mention this, you can't this, because that's our advertiser. Can't do that, right? So we can say whatever we want. So, which is exciting, because I know that we're going to talk about a big idea here about, and we're going to get into some really big things. Howard does a lot of interesting work. He's a phenomenal writer. I would highly recommend going back and reading some of his work, because, as you know, I don't use big words, and I like to write as I speak, and I love seeing that in other people, so that I feel like when I'm reading something from them, I'm actually in conversation with them, and it's on my level, and I'm not putting myself down. It's on a level that I can understand. I'm a person. I'm in a community. It's written to me, so I love that about your writing. So I want to let you know, and I want to let all of you out there know. So,
Thanks.
of all the things, and I know you have a book coming out tomorrow, right?
That's
So
right.
I'm really excited about talking about it, because proteins, and it's about protein.
Right.
So tell us about what it's about and what your work is about with protein.
Okay, so the book is called Protein-aholic, and it's based on the work of my lead author, who's a surgeon, a bariatric surgeon in Houston, named Garth Davis, and he has a great story. He was kind of a wonderkind. In his early 30s, he was already a successful bariatric surgeon. He was the star of a reality TV show on TLC called Big Medicine. He was featured in the Houston Chronicle, you know, on the cover story about their local health and medicine. He had it all. And at the same time, it turns out he was overweight, exhausted, had such bad irritable bowel syndrome that he couldn't go anywhere without like scoping out where's the restroom, where's the exit, fatigued, upset, angry a lot, and just, you know, really embarrassed and ashamed of that he was this public face of, you know, the medical fight against obesity and ill health and all the sequelae of obesity. And at the same time, he's living this life where all he wants to wear is scrubs because they're really good at hiding the weight he's putting on. And the story is largely about his own, you know, moment of realizing that there's got to be something else out there besides just going on all the meds, besides just following the plan, and say, like, is our body meant to break? Are we like issued lemons at birth, and it's all we have is the drugs and the surgeries that can save us? Or are there people in the world who are healthy, who don't have these problems, who don't have such high rates of disease and disability? And, you know, he grew up, you know, in Texas, where it's common knowledge, you know, America's number one, right? And it turns out we're number one in healthcare spending by a huge factor. We spend about twice as much per person on healthcare than the next most spendy country. And turns out we're like 34th or 50th, depending on how you measure, in life expectancy. So we're number one in spending, and we're getting a really bad return. So you don't have to be a great business person to realize, well, that's not working. Why don't we look and see what other countries are doing, what other populations are doing? So he decided to go study and see, where do people live long, healthy lives? What sort of lifestyle choices do they make? What sort of food habits do they have? And all of a sudden, and this is none of the stuff he'd ever encountered in medical school, where he didn't have a single nutrition class, he discovered that there was a pattern of eating that was across the board. It was the same in every civilization, in every population where people lived long, healthy lives. And we're talking about, if someone died in their 80s, that was sort of considered tragic. And if someone wasn't vital in their 80s, 90s, 100s, participating in the community, gardening, walking around, getting around on their own, mentally sharp, that was an anomaly. And the more he studied, and the more he learned about different types of research, epidemiological research of you know, just rates of disease and health around the world, clinical trials where you took people, you put them on a certain diet, you took other people, put them on a certain other diet, it all led to the same thing, that a starch-based, plant-based diet, mostly consisting of what he calls the bounty of nature, foods, plant foods, unprocessed as possible, with small amounts of animal products and even smaller amounts of processed foods. And those are both optional. That was the key to longevity. That was the key to vibrancy. That was the key to not just adding years to life, but of adding life to our years.
So what do you mean by proteinaholic?
Right. So you can imagine he discovered this research truth. He changed his own diet. He changed his life. He became lean. He started running marathons and triathlons.
How old was he?
At this point, he's in his late 30s.
Okay.
And so he's got all this energy, and he realized his irritable bowel goes away. His biomarkers return to normal. He's now the picture of health. And of course, he wants to share this with his patients. And so he would tell them, look, here's the way you should eat. He would give them books. He would give them food plans. And so, for example, he'd say, you might have a piece of fruit for a snack. And he'd come back in the following visit, and he'd look at their food journal, and he couldn't find an apple anywhere. But he said, look, they had beef jerky for a snack. I said, well, what happened to the fruit? He said, yeah, but I needed my protein. And this would happen over and over again. And we hear this, when I tell people that I'm plant-based or vegetarians or vegans hear this a lot. The first question you get is, where do you get your protein?
Right.
Right? So we have this obsession with, where do you get your protein?
Well, I have to interrupt you because I think this is really important. Because as I always like to eat as healthy as possible, right? But after a while, you get confused. You get confused between which diet. Now, everybody's different, right? So I did the blood type diet at one point where I, didn't eat chicken, but I could eat turkey because of my blood type, AB. And then it was no carbs or low carbs. And then it was, I've been on vegan, I've done vegetarian. I mean, I've jumped around some, and I don't mind vegan, and I love vegetarian. But I've never really, I want to hang my hat somewhere for a little while, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I work out a lot, and I hear people constantly putting protein powder in their drinks, and I try to do it, and I'm not crazy about it. But I'm curious, very curious about this topic, so I'm so glad we're talking about it because it is really timely in my personal life.
Sure. So everyone's got opinions about diet. So let's try to separate sort of opinions and dogma from research.
That's good.
So let's look at the evidence. And by the way, coming back to this marketing question, most of the diets that we are marketed to, we're being marketed to. Someone is making a buck off of that diet. Atkins, who kind of started the whole low carb craze.
I went to Atkins. I mean, I was 16 or 17, sitting across the desk from Dr. Atkins.
Oh.
Went to his New York office. My mother thought he had a great practice, and I went to Atkins, and he told me I could eat all the olives I wanted. I can have all the bacon I wanted, all the certain foods that I wanted, and then guess what happened to me?
What happened to you?
I ended up with a little thyroid issue. And my doctor said that if I had continued staying, and he put me on some kind of medicine, that if I continued, my medical doctor told me if I continued staying on what he did, what he was doing with me, I could have flown out the window.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. So yeah, I went to him.
Wow.
So good.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot of I went tos.
Yeah, so and everyone's got a story, and everyone knows about their 103-year-old uncle whose longevity secrets are, scotch and cigars and bacon for breakfast every morning. Right. So we all know people who do risky things and are fine. The question is, if a bunch of people run across the highway with their eyes closed, some of them will make it. And your 103-year-old uncle might be one of those people, but we don't want to say, well, that's a recipe for good health and longevity because it's simply not. So I'm not presenting opinions here. I'm just sharing what the research says.
And before we got started with the show, Howard was saying how he is a researcher. I was asking him about his practice, and people come to him with here's my file. Here's the information from my doctor. Now tell me, what is the best thing for me? He's not coming from the medical perspective. He's researching everything and giving what the research says, right?
Right. So
okay.
what's the best? What are the things most likely to help? in any given situation.
So plant-based.
So there's no question in thousands of studies. So this book, Proteinaholic, we have 699 references to published research in peer-reviewed journals. And, so someone else will come out with a book, let's say like Grain Brain or Wheat Belly, and they'll have some references in there too. So people will say, well, I'm just confused. They've got their science, they've got their science. You have to look at the difference in the science. So the good science, if you didn't know and you just wanted to know what's the best way to eat, well, what would you look at if you were just using common sense? The first thing I think you'd look at is, well, people who eat this way, how do they do? Right? As opposed to what a lot of diets do is they will just give someone some food and then measure what happens in their body for the next 2 hours. They'll measure some sort of biomarker and they'll say, hey, this diet raises the vitamin A level in the blood. We all know that vitamin A in the blood is correlated with less heart disease. Therefore, bacon reduces your risk of heart disease. So there's a great example using bacon. Again, coming back to Dr. Atkins, this crossed my Facebook feed a while ago, 4 or 5 months ago. It says, is bacon the fountain of youth? New studies suggest that eating bacon may extend your lifespan. So I'm really curious about this because, maybe it's true. Who knows? Science is the history of being wrong and getting closer and closer to truth. So I go and I try to find the study. And I just find more and more blogs referencing other blogs. But finally, I find the original study. It was an examination of the effect of niacin on tapeworms. Now, niacin is a vitamin. It's a chemical compound. Tapeworms are the teeny little things that you can see under microscopes, and sometimes they grow big enough to see. They fed niacin to tapeworms, and it turns out that on average it extended their lifespan from 9 days to 10 days. Now some marketer goes, hey, I think there's niacin in bacon. Wow. Therefore, they put out a press release, and all the bacon bloggers and the paleo people are sharing it on Facebook saying bacon is now the fountain of youth. And it took me about an hour and a half to find the study. And it was a complex, dense study with all these biochemical diagrams and tables and charts. And I'm a PhD in research. I didn't understand most of it. I didn't have the kind of specialization to understand most of it. But I got the basics that this was about, tapeworms and niacin. It wasn't about humans and bacon. But most people don't do that. Most people don't have the time to do that. And when you start seeing all this stuff, this is good for you, this is bad for you. Should I take aspirin? Should I have red wine? Should I not? Cheese is good, cheese is bad, low carbs, no carbs. We end up throwing up our hands and getting confused. And just like with the marketing of cigarettes, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell doubt. Because as long as we are in doubt, as long as we're saying, well, I really don't know, we're just going to go for the habitual foods. We're just going to do the things that make us feel good, which means we're going to go to have the steak, we're going to go have the ice cream, and we're going to go eat the Snickers bar, and we're going to say, well, everything's going to kill you, so might as well just have fun. And the truth is that not everything's going to kill you. Some things are going to give you a long, vibrant, healthy life, and other things are going to kill you, and the evidence is really clear that eating plants fresh from the ground, plants for human consumption, is correlated with less heart disease, less hypertension, less stroke, less cancer, less macular degeneration, less diabetes, less of virtually every one of the major killers of human beings in 21st century America.
So it's not like we have a question out here about what do you think about paleo? So it's not about a specific name for a diet, paleo or this or that. It's just the plants.
Right. Well, you want to sell a book, you got to give it a name.
Right.
So it's been called the Whole Food Plant-Based Diet, which is accurate, but I don't think it's a very pizzazzy marketing term. I think paleo are much better marketers.
Right.
So first of all, paleo typically is code for eat lots of meat. So you could be vegan or plant-based and paleo, but it basically it means lots and lots of protein. And there's all these foods that paleo is like a church that keeps splitting into different parts. So you know, a lot of people in paleo say beans are bad for you, legumes are bad for you, right? Because they have these phytates and they're, you know, they inhibit absorption of minerals. So they've got their little narrative. Well, then let's go see how that works in the real world. Let's look at, let's say, the 5 civilizations, the 5 communities that have the best longevity in the world. What do they eat? Turns out they eat about an average of a cup of beans per person per day. So, you know, here's the question of, you know, a whole bunch of people are going around saying the sky is orange, but we look up and we see the sky is blue. That kind of negates the whole point. So I think, you know, paleo, first they get some things right. They like to talk about eating more natural foods. So they would eliminate a lot of processed foods, a lot of refined sugar, a lot of refined flour. The problem is, so paleo is a version of what we call low carb. And when people think of carbs, they think of what sorts of foods?
Bread,
potatoes,
rice,
pasta. Right. So people go on paleo. They'll go on Atkins or they'll go on some other flavor, South Beach or paleo. And then they'll lose some weight for a while, and there's good reasons for that. Right. And then they'll plateau, and then they'll start gaining weight again. Mm-hmm. And they always blame the carbs. They'll say, I was weak. I had a slice of pizza the other day. I had a donut. Our coworker had brought in donuts, and I had a donut. And so they think, if only I could stick with the program, with the low-carb program, then I would be fine. Well, that's like saying to someone, you need to stick to a low-oxygen program. You're getting too much oxygen. Oxygen is bad for you. We did a study. We gave people 100% oxygen, and they passed out, and they got all sorts of septicemia. So we know that oxygen's not so good for you. So try to take in less oxygen. You can do that for a little while. But what's going to happen eventually, right?
Right.
You're going to go, oh, I took in all, now I'm lightheaded. Right. I took in too much oxygen. Right. So we can talk about carbs. But carbohydrates are basically the fuel source that human beings were designed to consume. You know, if you look at a VW, you can say, well, it was designed to consume diesel. We can see this because of the injectors, because of the way the engine was built. Therefore, let's put in diesel and not unleaded. We look at a Ford Focus. We can say, well, that was designed for petrol, for gasoline, and we can tell. So human beings were designed to eat carbs. We convert carbs into sugar. Every one of our cells runs on sugar. And so to say that we're not meant to eat carbohydrates when it's also the thing that we crave is just insane. Now, we live in a society where you can take your you can take your naturally occurring carbohydrates and process the heck out of them. And you can get, you know, refined white flour, refined sugar. And those are clearly not healthy because they're not whole. They're, you know, it's again, somebody's marketing this stuff. But carbohydrates are, again, the basis of every healthy civilization. So, you know, when, if we look at, let's say, Asian civilizations, Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian, very, very rice-based, largely, most, right? And a lot of them had white rice. It wasn't even like they were just eating brown rice, right? So for a couple hundred years, they learned how they've been milling inexpensively. It's a white rice-based diet. They weren't obese. They didn't have high rates of disease. There was almost no prostate cancer in Japan in the 1950s. What happens when those people come over to America? There's a lot of really good migration studies where, you know, we can study Japanese in Japan and then the people who migrate to Argentina or to Hawaii. And within a generation, they take on the exact disease risk and obesity risk of their host population. Their genes didn't change as they crossed the ocean. Their genes didn't change at passport control. Their diets changed. Their lifestyle changed. And that's what caused the changes in their health outcomes. When they were eating a high rice diet, or a lot, you know, Italian peasants would eat sort of a lot of bread. Mm-hmm. You know, and whether it's whole grain or some white, you know, definitely brown rice is better than white rice. Whole grain bread is much better than white flour bread. But these are things that, you know, have been traditional foods that communities have come together over, that people crave, and that turn out to be the things that provide us with the best, cleanest burning fuel.
So I want to get into this idea about protein being, you know, you don't have to have meat
Sure.
or certain things for protein. But we have a question out on our chat, and I want to ask you. And I also want to invite you all. I mean, I'm sitting here, don't even want to ask or open my mouth because I want to hear everything that he has to say. But please feel free to call in anytime you like, 919-518-9773, or you can Skype in with us, the computer's 2, that's the number 2K voice, and you can partake in our chat by just putting in your name, nickname, whatever it is, under our video, and you can ask questions in there as well, and I will answer, and I will ask the questions and get Howard to answer them. So the first question we have is here from Chris, and she wants to know when you stop eating something from a food group, from a family. Let's see, does that then, in other words, so the longer has been gluten free, she can't eat certain things in the food group. Is that the way it is?
Well, so I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Is it something like I've been gluten free for a couple of years,
So
and
can
now,
you, okay,
now
so
if I have a bagel, it really
when
hits
you
me
give
hard?
up one food in a food family, for example, grains, starches, could you eventually not tolerate any food in that group?
I'm not familiar with that phenomenon, but there's a lot of things going on. First of all, some people are sensitive to gluten, and I would say if you eat a food and it makes you feel bad, you should stop eating that food, right? Don't, there's a certain level at which you want to become your own expert. So, if someone's listening to this and say, hey, I'm doing X, Y, Z, it's the opposite of what you're saying, and it's really working for me, good. I don't work with people. People don't come to me and say, hey, everything's working for me, I don't want your advice. Right? So there's people who shouldn't be eating gluten, or who have some sensitivity to gluten or to various other foods, right? We all know people with allergies. Whether it's the gluten, now there's a lot of people I know who sort of stopped eating gluten, and then they went on a very plant-based diet. They gave up the meat, they gave up the processed food, and what happened is, over a course of 6 months to a year, their entire gut biome changed. And the biome is all of the creatures that live with us, and there's a lot more of them than there are of us. And there's an estimate like sort of 90% of our body is other creatures. It's, things living in our skin. And so they're really the ones doing the digesting. We don't do the digesting ourselves. We have all these critters inside us. And if you have a healthy gut biome, you might discover that after a few years, you're able to synthesize gluten with no problem, or soy, or some of the other things that maybe you were told you had a problem with. Now, there's also placebo. If someone tells you, oh, this is a bad food, and we know the placebo is the most reliable effect in medicine. If you tell someone, here, this pill will cure your pain, and it's just a sugar pill, most people will feel a pain reduction. If you tell them it's an expensive pill, they'll feel even more pain.
And I think even if somebody tells me something's going to bloat, if something bloats them, I sometimes assume it's bloating me too.
Right.
I mean, it's just how things kind of work.
Right.
Sometimes.
Right, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's the way we're wired. So that's why it's important to look at not just our own reactions or the stories that a friend tells us, but to look at clinical trials which have a test group and a control group, so that you can compare. Is it just placebo or not? One of the most interesting recent studies looked at people who are supposedly gluten sensitive, and not full-blown celiac, like it wasn't going to kill them, but they just reported sensitivity. And they were given meals. They weren't told whether this meal has gluten or not. And it turns out that the entire effect of gluten on making them feel bad was explainable by placebo. That it was essentially random.
Seriously.
Essentially random. That there was no evidence that there was a physiological response. People who were told they were eating gluten had the symptoms. People who were told they weren't didn't have the symptoms, regardless of what they were being served.
Well, a couple of months ago, I have a daughter who's celiac. I have a daughter who's been allergic to wheat, never diagnosed with celiac disease, but she will break out in hives and all kinds of stuff. And I am the autoimmune carrier because I had autoimmune as a child and still do somewhat. So they've been off of that stuff for a long time, gluten-free. I made the decision, I don't know how many years ago, to follow them because I'm, figured I'm the carrier. Well, we ate in a restaurant recently, the three of us, and we shared something. And we live in different houses, and the three of us got sick. we had different responses to what we ate, but the three of us got sick. So it was really interesting. So, and I don't like the idea of not ever being able to have something. If I wanted it, I want to be able to have it. Do you know what I mean? But I think that I must be, that I removed it for so many years that I guess in a quantity. If I had a little taste of something, I don't think it would affect me. I'm not celiac, but in a quantity of something, I think really got me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like I just, in terms of my personality, I don't want to be limited. I want to say, like, I don't call myself a vegan or a vegetarian or anything because I don't want rules.
I don't like rules either.
I just sort of want to, that said, I spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking with people, and I wrote a report recently called Sometimes Say Never. And this was my own personal experience with Cliff Bars, which are not the worst foods in the world.
they're not. Go ahead.
They're not the worst foods in the world.
Okay. They're not the worst foods.
They're not the worst foods in the world. But, and say if you were really, really hungry, you had nothing else to eat, and this was going to save you from, a headache or falling asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
So we had.
So you're practical. You have a practical, very practical side to you, right?
I try
With all of this,
to be.
there's a practicality.
Yeah, I mean, we have to live in the world.
Exactly.
So I was having this problem with Cliff Bars. We'd go to Costco and we buy the box of 18 because they're much cheaper that way. And we'd say, well, these are in the house for sort of emergencies. Like, one of my kids has to go off in something and they need a snack for something. Or maybe I'm going to be driving home late and I'm not going to, all I'm going to pass is like, gas stations with crap. In there.
Right,
Can I
chips.
say in the radio?
Oh, you can say anything you want,
I
right?
can say anything I want.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, I've been so polite so
No,
far.
don't be polite. Oh, come on.
But I discovered that I was having Cliff Bars because they were in the house, and I was having like 3 a day. It's like, well, I'm a little tired now. I've got to go I got to make a video or I got to write something. I'll just have a Cliff Bar. And I was having the Cliff Bars instead of fruit, instead of other things, and they weren't really for me. They were for other people in the household. And so ordinarily I would say if there's a food that you're like addicted to or you can't get out of your mind, like get it out of your house. But that wasn't fair. So
Right.
I said, I'm never going to have a Cliff Bar again. And I did a whole thing. I worked with a friend who's a clinical psychologist. He talked me through it, and we got to the point where I'm like, that's it. I'm never going to have a Cliff Bar again. And now they're in the house. They've been in the house for like months, and I haven't had one because they're my never.
You're never.
And it's not even like it's,
Right.
again, it's not the worst food in the world, but for me,
Yeah.
it was completely disempowering, and it would have felt even more disempowering to say, get it out of the house, because I am so weak in the face of this Cliff Bar that I cannot conduct myself rationally. I want that Cliff Bar right in front of me, and I say, I win, you lose, I don't eat you.
Yeah, I just did that with wine, actually. I found that wine was making me very nasal. I'd wake up, but that's after having that's on the second. I think the first cup or the first glass isn't so bad. If I had a full glass, if I have a little bit, I'm fine. If I have this much, I'm not fine. And I wake up and I'm completely stuffed for an entire day. Be it the sulfites, be it something else, I don't know. But it's not worth it. And so somebody said, well, drink organic wine. It doesn't have the same sulfite content in it. So I might choose to try that, but it's not so important to me that it could be my never. And I can have something else.
Yeah, and again, I say sometimes say never,
Yeah.
because I think there's people who are like never
Yeah.
about everything.
Well, that's different.
And, and it's not always necessary, and it's not even the best policy sometimes. So one of the things that I teach is the difference between food and like treats. Right? Like wine is a treat.
It's a treat, yes.
It's not something you have, every
No.
night.
No.
I mean, there are people who need 3 glasses of wine at night, and there's a word for them.
Right.
It's called alcohol dependency, whether they end up, acting out or not.
So it's like what works for your lifestyle? What works for you? Even in whether you're having treats, we don't want to live in such a way that we can't sustain it.
That's the entire point.
Right, gotcha.
Right, so that's my criticism with paleo. Aside from the fact that there's no evidence that people don't sustain paleo, right? One of the issues is they're eating so much meat that they can get bored. So people lose weight because they're just, I got to eat this. Bacon seems very
They eat
exciting.
less and less.
They tend to eat
Right.
less. And fat is very, very filling. So if you're eating, high-fat bacon and full cream butter and coconut oil, you tend to fill up rather quickly. You don't want to eat other stuff.
Right.
The second is that paleo, if you're having sufficient protein and insufficient carbohydrates, your body has to use that protein to fuel itself, which is a very inefficient process. And one of the side effects of that process is nausea. So, if you want to go on the nausea diet, and the main reason that people lose a lot of weight with paleo, aside from the fact they're eating fewer calories, is it's mostly water weight. Because we have glycogen stored in our livers, and that's stored with water, and we use that as a fuel reserve. So if you're like running a marathon, you can't eat enough pasta to fuel the entire marathon, but luckily we have reserves because our bodies need the carbohydrates so badly, we store some extra. And when we start drawing down those stores because we're getting protein but not carbohydrates, then we lose that glycogen from our liver and we lose all the water that was buffering it.
So I want to, and this is really, I could spend like forever talking about this. I know you can too, because this is stuff it's on all of our minds. But just to clarify, so if you have, because the question's coming up again, and someone's saying that she hasn't been eating grains, now she can't tolerate any. So do you just try a little bit at a time? How do you start to introduce? Do you start to introduce it? Do you just make the assumption you're done with it?
Well, so we're talking about grains.
Yeah.
There are grains that I would avoid if you are celiac or gluten intolerant or have autoimmune issues, right? The acronym is BROW, so barley, rye, oats, and wheat. So those are all very similar, even though oats are technically gluten-free. They can mimic gluten. So we want to stay away from those. But there's a lot of other grains that maybe aren't so popular here. So quinoa, millet, amaranth are things you could try.
And isn't there like a biblical wheat, like a wheat that I've heard about?
There's something called einkorn,
Yeah.
which is sort of a more ancient wheat. It's now being marketed.
Okay.
I think that was featured in Wheat Belly, and so then all the marketers jumped on board and said, "Hey, let's tell it." I saw at Whole Foods the other day, like einkorn pancake mix and einkorn this and einkorn that.
And that's something to try. Even if you're gluten-free.
Not if you're gluten-free.
Okay.
I wouldn't start there. But one issue is America lives on just like 4 different kinds of food, right? So it's basically all wheat, soy, corn, rice. Like there's not much variety. Like healthy people eat a variety of foods. So one of the things that could lead to this kind of sensitivity is the amount of wheat we eat in America. There's evidence that the pesticides that are used to grow the wheat can trigger things, and it's once you remove the pesticides, once it's been triggered, your body then says, "Oh, this is wheat. I have this reaction to it," even if it's not the original cause.
But isn't that a big problem with gluten? Is because of the way it's? I mean, because we didn't always have a problem with it, right?
Right. It seems fairly recent, and when you're looking at something like that, there's no easy way to tease out what the cause is. Is it pesticides? Is it environment? Is it the Earth's magnetic field? Is it vaccines? Right. We could go into a million.
Is it placebo?
We can go into a million different places and say, what it could be. For someone who's suffering, none of that is comforting. I would also say there's plenty of starches that are not grains. So we just pulled up our crop of sweet potatoes in our little farm. We got several hundred pounds of huge sweet potatoes. They're really easy to grow here, right? There's a reason that a lot of sweet potatoes grow in North Carolina. Like one thing to do is eat the foods that grow in your your local region. They're probably good for you.
And they're
sweet.
Yeah. So you're being asked. So what do you eat for protein, or what do you not eat?
Okay, so let's come back to the metaphor of oxygen. So protein is probably the most crucial nutrient that we take in, and because we need it in fairly large quantities. It's called a macronutrient, which means big, as opposed to a micronutrient. So the macronutrients, there's only 3 of them. There is carbohydrates, fats, and protein. And that's where we get our calories. And then the micronutrients are things like vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, plant chemicals, compounds like that, that we need in very, very small quantities. And they're crucial, but protein is the thing that's the most important for us to get as a macronutrient because it's the stuff that we're made of. It's our amino acids, it's our DNA, it's our muscles, it's the proteins are the cells that tell that proteins are the substance that our cells churn out, that the hormones, the enzymes, right? It's really, really important. So if you just think about whether you believe in God or evolution, would it make sense for something so important to the survival of a species to be hard to get? Right? We need air, right? We need oxygen.
So it's all over.
It's all over. If we faced oxygen deficiencies, we'd be dead as a species. It's the easiest thing to get because it's the most important. So protein is the same way. It is impossible to get enough calories on a natural diet without getting enough protein. Now, if you just ate, like Little Debbie snack cakes, I'm not sure. You might not.
Interesting.
But let's take a crazy example. And let's say you just wanted to live on potatoes, nothing but potatoes. Now, people would say, well, that's all carbs. You're not going to get any protein. The average potato, according to the U.S. Nutritional database, is about 10 to 11% protein, and which means that if you're eating sufficient calories, you are getting more than enough protein. So one question is, how much protein do we need? And the answer is we only need protein to replace the protein we've lost unless we're in an active growth phase. So who's in an active growth phase? Infants. Mm-hmm. So, what do infants eat according to nature? They have breast milk. Mm-hmm. Breast milk is 5 to 6% protein. That's it. That's our highest requirement, 5 to 6% protein. Competitive athletes, some of them need more protein. Endurance athletes, turns out, need more protein than bodybuilders. And they may need sort of, twice as much as everybody else. Infirm elderly who are have a kind of muscle wasting may need extra protein to replace the.
But extra means what?
Well, so we can talk about numbers.
Okay.
So the USDA for protein, the average is 56 grams of protein for men, 46 for women. A day. So, and the RDA, recommended daily allowance, is actually not the average, but it's more than what 97% of the population needs.
So 50% basically seems like the round off number, men and women. You said women is 40 something?
46 grams for women, 56 grams for men. So yeah,
around
around
50.
So let's be on the safe side and say we want 60.
Okay.
So if we're looking for 60 grams of protein, so I was traveling the other day. I went to a Chipotle's, and I had their burrito bowl with brown rice, a couple kinds of beans, some of the little fajita stuff, salsa, corn, little guacamole, mm-hmm. and like the shredded lettuce. So I went on their website. I was curious, like how much protein would be in that. And it turns out it was always 28 grams. So that's one lunch with half of your protein. So the reality is that almost all of us are getting way more protein than we need. The average American gets somewhere between 102 and 130 grams of protein per day.
So if you work out, lift weights, regular person lifting weights, working out, doing some exercise, is it necessary for people to be taking protein in their, supplements and all this stuff?
No, absolutely not.
Yes, because I don't like how it tastes.
In fact, here's one thing that's
powdery.
that people don't realize, that protein supplements only work in the presence of carbohydrates. So people will take these like 50-gram protein shakes, mm-hmm. and then make sure there's not a carb in sight. They're just flushing it out. It's not doing anything. It doesn't get activated. It doesn't get used except in the presence of carbohydrates. So if you're seriously lifting, or you're running, ultra marathons, like this is like well above and beyond sort of your,
not me.
3 hours of exercise,
right.
Moderate exercise a day.
Right.
You really want to build some muscle.
Right.
You more than 20 grams is wasted. There's never been a study showing that more than 20 grams is ever gets used, and you want to have it with some carbs.
But fruit is a carb, right? So if you're
You can have
having
it
it
with
in
fruit.
fruit juice and
Right.
stuff like that, that's
So here's a weird thing. So we know that you need a certain amount of protein, and we know fruits are very low in protein. So apples, bananas, peaches, grapes, pears. If you lived on an all-fruit diet, there doesn't seem to be a way to get enough protein. You're not going to get enough grams. So there's a whole bunch of people out there who are raw fruit athletes who self-report that all they eat is fruit, or 85 to 95% fresh raw fruit, and they run ultra marathons. There's a guy, Michael Arnstein, who was one of the best endurance athletes in the United States. His website is, I think it's the fruitarian.com. And we don't know how these people not only survive but thrive on extremely low protein diets, whether our needs are much lower. But we said endurance athletes need more than almost anybody else. So it's thought that possibly these fruits have amino acids, but they aren't combined into proteins. But our bodies are smart enough to take this thing that we need so badly and to make use of even the amino acids in fruit and to get all the protein we need. So in the United States, there is not a documented case of protein deficiency in the absence of calorie deficiency. So if you're not getting enough calories, you can have a protein deficiency. What we have is an epidemic of protein toxicity, of people taking in far too much protein because they think protein is exactly what they need. And in recent surveys, people were saying they buy food because it says protein on it. In 2011, the star of Jersey Shore, The Situation, came out and endorsed a product called, I think it was Ovation Vodka, or Devotion Vodka, that was laced with protein. So if you want abs like The Situation, you should drink this vodka with protein in it. And you walk down the supermarket, like every label is screaming how much protein it's got protein. And one problem is we're getting far more protein than we need, and we've seen that excess protein is associated with cancer, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, macular degeneration, all these conditions. And because we are so focused on individual nutrients, we're eating foods that we know are bad for us because they have protein. So, it's like you see so many parents like, oh, well, my kid's a terrible eater, but I gave him ice cream because it has calcium and protein.
So it's how much we're eating, not just, and so based on what you know and all the research, and then we have a question here from Mike that I want to get to.
Sure.
But based on everything that you know, we're eating too much protein, and we're eating our protein in the wrong ways.
Yes. And the two are actually completely related, even though it's two different concepts. Because when you look at, so a lot of studies have shown that sort of 10% of our calories from protein is a good number. It might be a little excess. We know 5 to 6% is probably fine, but 10%, there doesn't seem to be any harm. When you start increasing that, and when you look at line graphs, when the protein goes above 10%, the rates of disease go up. So we've got sort of 0 to 10% is the healthy range, or say 5 to 10% is the healthy range, and above 10% is an unhealthy range. Americans average 15 to 20% of their calories from protein. If you're paleo, you're getting more like 40 or 50% of your calories from protein. So 10% is about what plant foods are. If you eat a varied diet of plant foods, including greens, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, all that together in sort of an intelligent combination, you'll get about 10% of your calories from protein. If you're eating animal products, you're getting close to 20% of your calories from protein. So it's both, and if people try to eat a ton of animal protein, so they're taking like, pea protein in their shake, PEA, not your, or soy protein. I don't want anyone to go off and get confused.
You'll just make them listen more.
Yeah, right. Don't pee in your shakes. I want to make that very clear. Right, or people are having lots of tofu or chickpeas, and they're trying to go for the higher protein foods. Plant protein does not react in the same way in our bodies. It doesn't cause toxicity. It doesn't, animal proteins, one of the main surprising things they do, and I think most people will be very shocked to hear this, is they're toxic to pancreas cells that produce insulin.
Regardless of whether it's organic or not organic.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Have
It's
any
the same,
bearings. It's the
same stuff. Diabetes has been around for a long time, long before we had pesticides. It's the animal protein, and it also causes fat toxicity in the cells, where the fat in the cells gets to interfere with the absorption of carbohydrates, and so it's called insulin resistance. So the insulin's trying to push it in. The cell is saying keep it out, so our blood sugars rise. So these are, you know, people think that it's the sugar that causes the diabetes. The high blood sugar is the symptoms of fatty cells that have rejected and have lost the ability to metabolize the sugars. So we have a situation where the animal proteins are toxic to us. Another way they're toxic is animal proteins look like us to us. In other words, you eat a piece of meat, your body goes, oh, that's me. I'm meat. So there's a lot of, you know,
Wow.
so it can trigger autoimmune.
Wow.
Right? Because the body is
wow.
going, well, this is toxic. Well, then that must be toxic too. But that's your own muscle that it's starting to reject.
Oh, wow.
So it's both.
Isn't that interesting? Okay, let me ask you this question because I could.
Yeah.
Will you come back? Will you come back one day?
Yeah.
I'd love to have you back.
People find it hard to shut me up. They don't find it hard to
No, I
me.
want to invite you again. Listen, Mike says, please speak to the increase in adult onset type 2 diabetes in the last few decades.
Sure. That.
Can you do it in just a few minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Because then Suziani also has a really good question.
Okay, so when people say, when they want to defend meat eating, they'll say, well, we've been eating meat as a civilization, as a species for however long we can go back, and it's true, we have. When you look at the amount of meat we're eating now compared to say 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, we're eating like 3 times the dairy. We're having, and the main culprit is actually chicken, which people think of as kind of a health food, right?
Oh my God. Oh.
So
Oh.
So when you look at, like, you ever eat sort of like a chicken from the 1950s? So I lived in Africa for a year. And there the chickens look like the chickens used to look here. They're scrawny, they're tough, they're muscly. I had a chicken leg in Africa. I was like, oh, this is like.
I don't eat much meat. That's the only thing I eat, really. But yeah.
Yeah, this is like it was.
No, I would die if I had.
If you
eat
eat,
like
if you have chicken here, if you ever look at it, go to a chicken farm, which they won't let you do.
Thank God.
The chickens are obese. The chickens weigh something like 5 times what they used to
I
weigh.
like that.
They can't walk. Their legs are broken because they can't even stand up. So yeah, it's an animal welfare issue, but it's also
Right.
you're eating obesity.
Right.
So the amount of animal products we're consuming is significantly greater than it has ever been in the past. And and we're also eating a lot of other crap. There's a lot of sodas. So I wouldn't say this is a debate between the soda haters and the meat haters, right? Which is how it's often framed in the media. Like what's Robert
worse?
Lustig says sugar is evil. We should be eating a lot of meat and bacon and stuff like that, and cheese and stuff like that. And other people are like, no, sugar is sugar's fine, but we should avoid the meat. You know what? Why not avoid both? Like why not?
Okay.
Why not? Instead of getting, choosing whether you get beaten to death by a stick or shot, why don't you avoid both?
Yeah, my brother is a doctor. He used to say when people wanted to go into and tan, you might as well take go into a tanning booth. You might as well take a shotgun to your head. No different. It's worse than sitting outside. So that's good. And I want to talk about your book really quick, but also just tell me, raw versus cooked.
Raw versus cooked. There's first of all, there's very few people who eat raw. So when you're talking about the whole population, there's not that many people who eat entirely raw diets. So it's hard to study them. When we do, I know some people who are mostly raw who are in terrific shape. I suspect it's when you eat raw, there's all these foods you can't eat anymore, right? You can't have animal products. You can't have the Little Debbie's fudge brownies. So if you're just eliminating lots of bad food, it's probably good for you. There's some evidence that cooking certain foods makes them more what we call bioavailable. The nutrients are more accessible. I don't know any serious evidence that cooking kills enzymes. And again, who are we talking to here? If this was like a if all the people listening are like vegans who are considering going raw, that's one thing. The problem is most people have their diet flipped around. They're having 5% of their calories from whole plants and 95% of their calories from animal foods and processed foods. And if you flip it around, or if you even go 50-50, if you take the My Plate, and sort of 75% of your plate is grains, fruits, or vegetables, you're already doing so much better than the average American.
So start with something. In other words, start somewhere. Don't go from, A to Z. Start somewhere. So let's see, Suziani, let me see where she is. She's asking a question about, isn't it true that most vegans and vegetarians get their proteins mostly from soy-based plants? Isn't tofu soy and edamame is soy? Isn't it bad for us or bad for women?
Yeah, now soy is one of those great misconceptions that is totally a marketing thing. So let's break that question down. A lot of vegans get their protein from soy because they believe the same thing that the rest of us believe, that it's hard to get protein if you're not eating animals, so they have to make sure they get tofu or tempeh or some other soy product with every meal. That's true. It's also true that they're wrong. So one of my favorite statistics is that there's more protein in broccoli than in steak per calorie. Now you'd have to eat an awful lot of broccoli, right? So a pound of broccoli is like 100 calories. So if you wanted to get like 2,000 calories from broccoli, you'd have to eat 20 pounds of broccoli, but you'd get way more protein than you need.
So in terms of calories, what did you say about how many calories on an app? Let's say on an app like a 1,500 to 2,000. You might not have said this, but a 1,500 to 2,000 calorie diet. Mm-hmm. How much of that should be protein?
Well, so 10%.
10%. Okay.
So 100 calories, or 200 calories.
Okay.
Depending on your caloric
That's
needs.
what you need, but you're going to get more than that.
You're almost certainly going to get more than that. You have to work to not get more than that. Now, the thing about soy that I do want to address is so that one of the things critics of soy say is that it contains a substance called phytoestrogens. And phyto means plant, estrogen means estrogen. So it's female sex hormones. And so they're saying if people eat soy, the boys are going to develop breasts, they're going to turn gay. So as far as I know, we have thousands of years of evidence from China and Japan of men, thin men without breasts who are not all gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, just the ridiculousness of that claim. Now, if you want to talk about foods that are high in estrogen, how about the secretions of a lactating or pregnant cow? You don't think that cows are high in estrogen when they are supposedly breastfeeding their own babies? The estrogen in milk is off the charts. The estrogen in milk products is even higher because it's concentrated. It takes a lot of milk to make cheese. So if you're worried about estrogen, the first thing you should eliminate from your diet is dairy.
And the other thing is, and then I want you to go right to your book because we're like out of time. But the other thing is about the GMOs and all that kind of stuff in soy. The only thing I know is to eat more organic soy than the.
Who eats soy? Cows eat soy. Chickens eat soy. Pigs eat soy. Soy, 95% of the GMO soy is fed to the animals that we're eating, and you can feed.
That doesn't make me very happy either. Right?
No, so if you want to eat soy, it's really hard to get inorganic tofu. Like if you go to a store, most of the tofu they sell is organic. Mm-hmm. The tempeh is largely organic. Organic is not GMO.
Right.
So even if you had a choice between GMO tofu or GMO animal that has been eating, where all the GMOs have accumulated, because when you're eating animals, you're eating the top of the food chain. So every negative thing in our environment gets concentrated in their tissues. And there's, if you want to look at like the effects of eating animals on at a really extreme level, you look at the people who have the highest exposure. So like remember, you had asbestos. So we want to look at like what does asbestos do to asbestos workers? Well, so let's look at people who work in chicken processing plants. Men who work in chicken processing plants have 9 times the rate of cancer of the penis than the general population, and they're not even eating it. They're just sort of breathing in.
Sitting on it. They're not sitting on it either, are they?
No.
So should we ask Howard back, shouldn't we, everybody? Because there's so much to talk about, right? Could you just share your book? Because
Yeah,
I think
do I-
that's fascinating.
should I
yeah, hold it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
look,
so
this
I,
is
I
great.
only wear
Tell
red,
them
so I
what-
match
tell-
the book.
yeah.
It's called Proteinaholic. Main author is Dr. Garth Davis. This is live today, so it comes out tomorrow, October 6th. It's a really important book for the movement, for anyone who wants to be healthier, help other people be healthier. And it also talks about environmental impact, ethical impact. And we're not talking about going vegan. We're not talking about any sort of dogmatic approach, but just flipping those numbers, getting 90 to 95% of your calories from where we're supposed to, from whole plants. There's a recipe section, so it's delicious. And we really want to spread the word because, changing our agricultural system from animal-based to plant-based is the single greatest thing that we can do for the planet, and it's only going to happen when demand drives it.
And this stuff is it's when you're up against the marketing, it's difficult to get these kinds of messages out. So I really appreciate Howard being here and doing this way, and I appreciate all of you for being here and listening, because this is the only way you're going to hear it. It's not only way, I shouldn't say that, but one of the good ways.
And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and have this microphone.
My pleasure. We want you to come back. So just tell everybody where they can find you personally.
All right, so you can find me personally at trianglebewell.com. That's my health consulting practice, where I work with individuals to help them get off the medical mill and achieve true wellness. I have a podcast at plantyourself.com. Every week I interview people that I want to talk to, people who inspire and challenge me. And I'm also available at proteinaholic.com, where we are creating a community for people who have read the book and want to embrace and transition into this incredibly healthy lifestyle.
Perfect. Well, we will definitely have Howard back, because this is really important, obviously, very important. We are what we eat, right? And that one thing about eating ourselves, that really got me. So we got to have him back. All right. So with that, thank you all for being here today, for being here with Howard and me and Amnon. And we will see you next week, and Howard will be back. If I can be of any help to you at all, please get in touch with me at marilynshannon.com. And please go to look at my website, marilynshannon.com. And I'm also on Facebook and all that good stuff. And I'm blabbing a little. So if you come on Blab, look for me next Sunday. And Skywire on Google Plus at 11 o'clock on Thursday, all about listening. With that, have a fabulous day. We'll see you next week. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.